What's something you saw as a kid that looked harmless, but if you witnessed it now it would horrify you? When I was a kid, I remember riding around on the back of this app in this sort of homemade buggy trailer. Our school was volunteering to set things up for a marathon, if I recall correctly. Anyways, I remember watching some of the older guys jump off while the app was still moving, and being young wanting to emulate them, I tried doing it. I remember catching my foot on this rock, falling, rolling, and people screaming. I got up embarrassed and just sort of shook it off. Didn't understand why the older people were shaken. Didn't remotely grasp the fact that the rubber of the wheel was touching my face, about to use my head as a speed bump. Looking back, that driver had some incredible reflexes. I've always loved the tranquil feeling of being underwater. When I was a kid, I would just hold my breath and float around. Sometimes adults would think I was drowning and run up and scoop me out. I don't remember this, it was when I was pretty young, but my parents have told me about it. I used to think it was a funny story. People thinking I was drowning when I was just trying to relax. Until I watched a video explaining child drownings, and the way I acted in water looked exactly like a drowned kid. Flood water. It was fun and games for the kids, and we even splashed around in it, much to the horror of our parents, who immediately scrubbed us down. We didn't understand then, but now, oh whoa, sewer insects, rats, parasites, etc. My friend and I were walking along the road in about thigh-high flood waters. A small boat with two men comes up to us. We were about 9 years old, and I think they were National Guard. Anyway, one of the men asks if we remembered exactly where the manholes in the road were. We answered no. He told us that all of the covers had most likely been washed away in the flood, but not to worry because it would probably only take them a few days to find our bodies if we were sucked down one of the holes by currents they produced. He spoke in a matter-of-fact tone and then left. As an adult, I have zero doubt those two men had a good laugh as they looked back and watched us nope out of that water like two roadrunners in a cartoon. Edit. It was fish and game wardens. Thing didn't come until later. Had a jogger get hit by a car outside my house once when I was about 8 or 9. My nephew came running inside yelling at my parents and my sister to call the ambulance because he was bleeding pretty badly. I could even see him from our playroom's window, and I wondered what he was doing lying on the grass. Turns out he was bleeding out pretty badly, deliriously yelling at my parents when they tried to help. Eventually, an ambulance came and picked him up, but my parents always told me he made it out okay. The day after, in the spot he was found, someone had put a lily in the grass in a vase. It took me longer than I care to admit to figure out he died from the hit and run. I grew up in a tiny country town. When I was about 7, I walked out of our front door one day and spotted a friend of mine who just came out of the small grocery store across the road. As soon as he saw me, he ran across the road towards me and straight into the path of a car. The scene after the accident was horrific. There was blood and spilt milk everywhere over the road. My friend survived, barely. He spent months in the hospital, and when he did come out, the poor guy had to wear a helmet all day. I didn't realize this for a long time, but the accident obviously caused some brain damage too. His whole personality and temper changed. He became very quick-tempered and constantly out to antagonize everyone. That meant that very quickly no one wanted to hang out with him anymore. Having no friends just made him angrier too. He was constantly fighting with everyone, whether that's other kids in school, teachers, random adults. Of course, that was only verbal sparring. Everyone knew that his head injuries meant that he was basically untouchable. It was drilled into us that even just a light knock on the head could kill him. There's no happy end. I sort of lost contact with him because he missed so much of the school year when he was in hospital. He had to repeat the year and wasn't in my class anymore. The last I heard was that he died about 10 or so years after the accident. I have a childhood memory of my dad acting weird, stumbling and falling around the house and saying bizarre things that didn't make any sense. I thought it was fucking hilarious as a kid, that he was being goofy silly. I now know he was high as balls on Percocet. This hits home. I remember back in high school we used to laugh at my father while he stumbled and slurred words at night from drinking. Held a good job and didn't have any issues on a day-to-day basis. He was a highly functioning alcoholic. 20 years later, he's in his 60s and he's still an alcoholic but no longer highly functioning. His body can't handle the alcohol anymore. He's just began a road to recovery but hasn't been doing well with it. It's rough. I have one that is tragic. When I was 12, I had a friend who was abusive to his little brothers. It never clicked to me. We just thought it was sibling fun, albeit he was a little meaner. Well, he had a toddler brother. One day I was at his house with him alone while he was babysitting his toddler brother. At one point, he was playing with his brother, and then he stopped and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you tell anyone about this, I will kill you." He proceeded to pull his brother's diaper down and perform fellatio on him. I was horrified. We left, and it shook me for a long while. I told my closest friends, and we all knew it was wrong, but we honestly thought more about how that made our friend gay. Honestly, that was our biggest concern. I know it sounds stupid and fucked up, but we were just like, "Yokes is gay, man. You won't believe what he did." I kept the secret, except for telling my best friend, for maybe a few months, and then I was peer pressured into telling one of the popular kids of the school. The rumor mill went into full swing, and within a day or two the entire school was talking about it. At this point, I was terrified of getting into trouble. I was called into the principal's office in the afternoon and absolutely grilled. I remember how mean she was and how much I was crying. How much They made me write down what happened. Even still, I thought I was getting in trouble for being a snitch and spreading rumors. It was only until many years later that I understood this was child abuse and would prompt an investigation, and that the principal was grilling me to see if I was telling the truth. I didn't understand the concept of child abuse or what was happening. I just knew it was wrong and that my friend was gay, and that was the extent of it. Damn, that's exactly how I was when I was 12. If I saw that shit, my first thought would be, "Damn, guys, Billy is pretty gay for sucking his brother's dick." What happened to the older brother? Jesus Christ. One of the worst ones here. A kid fucking sharpened his fingers with an automatic pencil sharpener at grade 2. Everyone didn't know what was going on until the teacher started freaking out. I just remembered I tried to stick my finger into electric pencil sharpeners as a kid and disliked how my fingers were too big to fit in it. What the hell was I thinking? How sharp did he get it? When I was in high school, I got off the bus behind a kid I had known since middle school. We were walking to go inside when he just suddenly collapsed in front of me, smacked right into the pavement, and started seizing. I knew something was wrong, but I thought he would end up being okay. He died in the hospital the next day because of bleeding in his brain. I knew when it happened that it was really fucked up that I saw that, but I never realized how disturbing it is until I got older. Now it really makes me upset. I have memories of him from middle school, and he was just such a sweet and kind kid. He died freshman year, and they had a moment of silence for him at our graduation. And they had a moment for him It was very sad. I remember being an office aide in middle school, and my friend came into the office not feeling well. He had a seizure right there on the office floor. I'd never seen it happen before, and it freaked me out to see my friend like that on the floor. Thankfully, he was okay. What the cause was, as it was a long time ago. Similar story involving one of my best friends from high school. I can't do her justice, but she was the embodiment of kindness and warmth. To this day, I never met anyone that made me feel the way that she did when I was around her. I'd asked her to prom the week or so before. We were at a chore festival when she suddenly experienced a really bad migraine. She called her parents to pick her up, and I stayed with her. She laid her head down on me, and I held her tight until they came to pick her up. That was the last time I saw her. She passed out right when she got home and never woke up. Brain aneurysm. 20 years later, and that day is a scar on my heart. When I was dating my now wife, she was surprised when I admitted my love for her and intent to marry her just a couple weeks into our relationship. I just couldn't see the point in waiting until tomorrow to say to someone what you wish to tell them today. When I was around 5 years old, I was in the mall with my mom and her boyfriend. We were in a Radio Shack store and I was sitting at a computer checking it out. An older man walked up to the computer next to me to look at it, and next thing I knew he collapsed and landed on top of me across my lap. My mother's boyfriend ran over cause he thought he was being weird or something, but apparently he had a heart attack and died. I remember them pulling him off me and the paramedics showing up and us leaving. We had a high school teacher who would flirt with the girls, stand at their desks with his one foot up on the seat, basically putting his crotch in their face. Everyone just laughed at it and made fun of him behind his back. My grandma would save time by blow drying my hair when I was still in the bath. Oops, was she NASCAR pit crew. Oops. The hairdryer just nearly slipped out of my hand. Depends on the year. If you had a C outlet, then you would have lived. Hopefully, when I was in 6th grade, a girl showed up to school with a Tinkerbell tattoo on her hip. In our child brains, we found this very mature and grown up that her parents had let a family member tattoo her. Looking back at it now, it's concerning that anyone would sign off on a tattoo for a 10-11-year-old. Same thing happened at my school. In 6th grade, a girl came to school, and while changing for gym, she showed off a big tattoo that said "Daddy's little girl" on her barely developed breast. She turned out up, but you can still see the tattoo in pictures she posts on Facebook, and I cringed just thinking about it. Damn, that's crazy. Also, the fact that she could sit through all of that pain as a kid. Also, wouldn't it horribly morph as she grew? My babysitter was running late to take me to piano lessons and rear-ended an old man at a stoplight. She told me that he must not have noticed because he didn't get out of his car. I thought nothing of it, and she drove away and took me to my piano lesson. I forgot about it, and it didn't click until I remembered the incident years later that I had been unknowingly involved in a hit and run. When I was a freshman in high school, probably 14 years old, I went off campus with a couple of guys to get lunch. The guy that was driving was a senior. At one point, he got mildly cut off by a lady in a minivan. This infuriated him and he sped around her, cut right in front of her, and slammed on the brakes. This caused her to lose control of her car and turn in the oncoming lanes, where her van was hit right away by another car. The guy I was with just kept driving and laughed about it. I never knew if anyone was hurt. At the time, I thought he was mean and I didn't hang out with him anymore. As an adult, I really get how fucked up that was. I wish I would have told someone at the time. Fuck that guy. We used to jump of our roof. First time hurt a little, but after a few times you learned how to land. Did it regularly and would try various items as parachutes to see if it slows you down any. I look at that height now and wonder how the hell we never broke anything. Kids' bones are more elastic, I guess. My mom did this as a kid. She was always getting into stuff she shouldn't have been, so ended up hurting herself quite badly a few times and trying to hide it. She was jumping off the roof with her cousins and using a towel as a parachute. Unfortunately, she got a little too close to the building and a nail end sticking out got her on the way down. I'm not sure how far into herself she ripped in the bum from memory, but this was in a time when you didn't go to the hospital for anything. Rural America, people who had grown up in the Depression with no jobs or affordable health care. Watching my kindergarten teacher die of cancer. He just kept getting skinnier and paler and more exhausted, and eventually he just didn't show up anymore, and that was that. Didn't understand it then, obviously. In 2nd grade, I remember having a teacher that was pregnant, like really pregnant, and one day she showed up not pregnant and she seemed to be acting oddly. She miscarried twins on a Friday and showed up for class on Monday. Now that's being committed to your job. Later that year, her husband wrapped his truck around a light pole, shit-faced drunk. She still showed up for class. Holy shit, that's so sad and horrifying. In my childhood, my neighbor often hired us to help around the garden. When I turned 10, he asked me to come up and help pick the green beans. I went up in some red shorts. While I worked at picking the beans, I happened to glance back at him. I saw this weird jerking motion in his pants. Since I grew up in rural Tennessee in the 70s, I had absolutely no idea what was taking place. I just turned away and continued picking beans. Picking green beans requires a lot of bending over, and I wore very short red shorts. You can figure out what took place. I don't need to spell it out. Edit. I'm a 58-year-old male. At what age did you realize what happened and what did you do about it? Shit. This uncovered a memory for me. When I was young, me and my sister went to some guy's farm to pick asparagus because he needed help and would pay us. When was Yeah, where, so, tell you, mama, you need it, when we were in the garage cutting them, he made a comment to my sister about how some girls her age wear brass and some don't need to. I didn't think much of it, but looking back I am so glad we only went there a few times, because he was definitely a pedophile, and God knows what could have happened if we'd kept coming back. We did climbing in P6 to 8th grade, like rock climbing. We had to do our own harness stuff. P teacher supposedly checked it after we were done to make sure it was done right. One day my neighbor broke an leg because she wasn't properly strapped, fell. This was at an international American school in Egypt around year 2000. For all those wondering what type of school does rock climbing, the Vez store that my parents went to had an awesome playroom hidden in the back. Was it a sex dungeon kind of playroom or a child abduction playroom? Getting chased by a hippo while in a small motorboat. I was only like 8 at the time, but I thought it was very fun. Meanwhile, my parents were basically shitting their pants at it. Well, this got more attention than I thought. Lol. The context was my family hired a guy with a boat to bring us around the Okavango Delta. Calling him a guide would be generous. He was just a guy with a boat, and we got a bit too close to a lone male hippo. Chaz ensued. Hippos are utterly terrifying. I would have died of fright. When I was young and my parents were away, I had to sleep at my grandfather's. A sleepover that I always really enjoyed, because he spoiled me very much. I also liked the fact that each day my uncle came over for a few hours for some coffee. It was something I usually enjoyed, because my uncle and I have the same weird name, so it created a bond between us. Years later, the same uncle called my dad and my aunt and told them my grandfather had sexually abused him as a kid for 16 years. Every time he came by when I was sleeping over, it was to check if my grandfather didn't do something horrifying to me. Until now, I never had the chance to thank him, as he has a huge trauma and broke all contact with my parents. But when I realized that all that time he was there, just to protect me, I couldn't say anything for a few minutes. It hurted him so much to be there. If I would had known then, I would have get my stuff at my grandfather's and run away with my uncle. Edit. Sorry, but English isn't my first language. I'm not that good in grammar. Your uncle sounds like he's got an excellent soul. I can't imagine how stressful, triggering, and scary it must have been to repeatedly, willingly expose himself to his abuser. It must have terrified him to see you there, always feeling like he was the only thing standing between you and horrific abuse. He's a hero, and he's got the courage of one. I'm so sorry to hear he's endured so much trauma. And I'm very thankful to hear you weren't abused. Just a thought. But maybe you should get in touch and talk to him about it.
Like and subscribe for more Reddit content. Watch the next video at the top of your screen.